gentlemen, and welcome to this week's episode where I will be unpacking a topic that impacts many of us, young and old, and that is the student loan crisis. And honestly, this is really extended to a societal problem, as I will get into later. So it is really a relevant topic, whether or not you actually have student loan debt yourself. Now, how I'm going to break this down is we're going to take a look at facts and figures, including the price of college in the US versus the price of colleges worldwide. We will look at a brief history of student loans in the US, kind of to see how we got to where we are now with our over $1 trillion of student loan debt. And I will finish up with just some potential policies that could help address this albatross that is drowning so many people and so many families. But before that, as we always do, we're going to jump into our quick hits of the week, starting with some new details emerging regarding the political-driven assassination in Minnesota. So the 57-year-old suspect is now in custody. He has been caught. I am not going to use his name anymore because that is widely available. In the midweek mailbag earlier, I did use his name just because he hadn't been caught yet. But if you guys want to find out his name, you can look that up yourself. But this man is suspected of shooting two different Minnesota lawmakers and their spouses. One legislator, Melissa Hortman, and her husband, Mark, unfortunately, did die from the attacks this past Saturday. The other lawmaker that was shot and their spouse seemed to be recovering from surgery and luckily will survive the attack. Now, this led to the largest manhunt in state history. Authorities ended up locating a vehicle that the suspect had been using, and they believed they saw him running into the woods. And then the tactical team was sent out, and he was located after an hours-long operation that included the use of helicopters. Now, I also read that this individual, this shooter, was stopped actually initially before one of the shootings, but the officer who interacted with the individual did not stop them. And I'm reading that they mistook them also for a cop, even though the gunman was acting strange during this interaction. So there should be more information coming out regarding the police investigation into this. Now, this individual is facing 2 counts of second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. The suspect, if you guys have not been up to date on this, he actually disguised himself as law enforcement. Kind of goes back to what I just mentioned with that interaction between actual law enforcement and the gunmen. The suspect, though, a big part of this story is he had a kill list, which included names of prominent Democratic state and federal lawmakers, community leaders, and abortion rights activists. So, every time there is a shooting to this degree, particularly if it's politically driven or can be spun anyway to be politically driven, this one clearly was directly, but there have been endless trolls out there on the internet spinning this tragedy in a weird conspiratorial way. I'm not surprised. I predicted this immediately when it happens. That's unfortunately the news cycle we live in now. But in terms of my stance, guys, on violence, you know where I stand if you've been watching the show. It does not matter if you are murdering an insurance CEO, despite how corrupt I think our healthcare system is, despite the fact that insurance companies do lead directly through their decisions to other people's lives ending or being more difficult. I do not believe in violence to solve problems. Now, despite the right-wing effort to try to spin this conspiratorially, all objective evidence, guys, and I'm here to point to the facts, shows him being a right-winger. He was a huge Trump supporter. This is according to his roommate and one of his best friends. In fact, his roommate said if he was even called a Democrat, he'd be insulted by that. So the right wing trying to switched this into this guy being some lefty or some Marxist does not fit with the reality of what is happening. And also, guys, he's a registered Republican. There's video of him preaching in like an African country. So pretty staunch, Trump supporter, right-leaning individual. But guys, regardless of that, that's not really the story. The amount of political violence and assassination attempts and things like that is on the rise. And it's deeply troubling because it is aimed to create widespread fear. So this, guys, I haven't seen it labeled as a terrorist attack, or terrorism, even though lighting Teslas on fire is somehow considered an act of terrorism. But this is definitely should be labeled as a terrorist activity. If you are murdering lawmakers and you have a list to murder additional lawmakers based on their party affiliation. But as a whole, guys, my biggest concern is we've seemed to just accept political violence as like par for the course in the United States in the same way we see it in a lot of third world countries happening. In the same way we've just accepted school shootings when they happen. A lot of times if the body count isn't even high enough, they don't even make mainstream media anymore. So that's the part that's troubling about me, is the spread of politically motivated violence. And this is also an important note, guys. We already have lawmakers on record, like Lisa Murkowski, stating that elected officials are all afraid right now in this moment. And they're using that kind of as an excuse to not do their job. So there is no way an act like this is going to help our lawmakers necessarily move forward. Not all of them, not the ones in the category of Lisa Murkowski who are already frightened based on the position they are in. My argument would be step aside then and let someone do the job. But nonetheless, that is the reality we are facing. Now, before I move on to the next story, I want to finish with putting a face to this horrific attack. So I am going to play a clip from Representative Hortman. This was the representative that did lose her life. And in this video, she is fighting for health care for her constituents just like days before, I think it was a day before her tragic death.
I know that people will be hurt by that vote. And we worked very hard to try to get a budget deal.
So that's what we have, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lawmaker who seemingly, from everything I saw, was doing quality work in Minnesota, did things like pass universal child care, now has lost her life due to political violence. All right, moving on to story number 2, we have the Israel-Iran conflict escalating. As of this recording, they have entered now the 6th day of conflict, and Israel has already reported, guys, that this operation will likely take weeks, and it already has basic implicit U.S. approval from Donald Trump. So both sides at this point, so Israel and Iran, are increasing their attacks. The overall stated propagandized mission of Israel is to destroy Iran's nuclear program. But guys, the real goal, and Netanyahu has been pushing this idea of nuclear weaponry in Iran for like 3 decades. The actual goal is regime change. So it's the propaganda of nuclear weaponry, similar, guys, to what we saw in Iraq. We're seeing a lot of similar parallels. So the propagandizing to stoke fear, to cause war, to hopefully result in a regime change. So I'm going to give you some numbers also at the time of the recording. Explosions were seen hitting residential buildings directly in Israel and Iran as well. But the two sides are not equal in terms of death tolls. At the time of this recording, Israel was only at 24, while Iran was at 224. Now, Iran's supreme leader has stated that the battle has begun in face of Donald Trump demanding Iran's surrender. Remember, guys, Israel provoked the war, fired off the first shots here, not Iran. to be clear about the history of that, because Republicans like to rewrite the history like we had with Ukraine and Russia. Now, 2 U.S. officials reported that Trump rejected an Israeli plan to kill Iran's supreme leader, but Netanyahu, who is the prime minister of Israel, denied these reports. Now, guys, unfortunately, we have a situation where we have 2 pathological liars. So I honestly struggle to figure out who to believe in situations like this. Normally, historically, I would believe the president of the United States, but Trump has lied more than any sitting president in modern history. So it's very hard to ever take him at his word for anything he has said. Now, one thing he has acknowledged is that our deepening involvement in this war is a possibility. So the U.S. is once again going to act on behalf of Israel, get involved in another war. In my opinion, if Israel wants to stoke this war and get involved in it, the United States should not be fighting this war on behalf of Israel. We should not be sending money, and we for sure should not be putting troops on the ground and risking lives of our armed soldiers due to this conflict between Israel and Iran. But this seems like, once again, as I mentioned earlier, a repeat of the misinformation similar to what led up to the Iraq war all over again. But what makes this scarier, guys, is Iran is not Iraq. Iran has far more resources and is a far bigger nation. So think of the devastation, not only in lives, but in money too. Obviously, the lives come first. That cannot be replaced. But the United States is capitalism over humans often. This would be way worse, assuming we get involved in this, which all signs point to we will likely be increase our engagement in this conflict as time goes on, because quite frankly, guys, Israel cannot really succeed at the level it wants to without the backing of the United States Army. Now, moving on to story number 3, I'm sure that Israel-Iran conflict will be probably a story every week for the upcoming weeks, if not months, hopefully not years. But number 3 is story number 3. We have a Democratic senator, Alex Padilla, who was forcibly removed from a press conference. So this senator, like I said, his name is Alex Padilla. He was removed and handcuffed handcuffed after being removed from a press conference, and this press conference was being held by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem in L.A. this past Thursday.
Guys, ready? And bell. Sir, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the secretary, because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your
I also want to
hands off.
How many of our ICE agents have been docked?
On the ground. Hands behind your back. Hands behind your back.
If you let my hands go, I put behind my back.
All right. Cool. Other hand. Lay flat. Lay flat.
Other hand, sir. Other hand.
So Noem was there to give an update on immigration enforcement after the protests swept through LA. And Senator Padilla basically came in and said he had a few questions for the secretary during the speech. And he was almost immediately, as you could see from the video, met with force and removed from the conference. Now, a huge point of contention in this interaction is not only the fact that, a senator was forcibly removed like that, thrown to the ground and then put in handcuffs, but the Department of Homeland Security is reporting that Padilla did not identify himself, which is just a flat out lie. He clearly identified himself. And then the Department of Homeland Security also said that Padilla aggressively lunged towards Noem. Guys, I've seen far more aggression when the rotisserie chicken runs out at Sam's Club or Costco than anything near lunging aggression that Senator Padilla did in this video. That is not how I would categorize that whatsoever, as aggressively lunging. I look at this more so as equivalent to someone like tapping someone on the shoulder and then that justifying us turning around and punching them in the face. And what I mean by that is the forcible removal and the aggression of that did not at all, it was not warranted based on what Senator Padilla did in that moment. And guys, this in general is not normal. I don't want political shootings to become normalized. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, when Biden was, I think it was his inaugural address or it was a State of the Union. I don't know which one it was, but they were screaming nonstop, standing up in the chambers of, or in Congress, and there were no handcuffs, no forcible removements. But now under this administration, if you dare question them, even if you're a representative trying to go there and stand up for constituents, you are forcibly removed, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed. So once again, guys, this is not normal. And I want you to understand the reason Kristi Noem was even there and kind of, the big issue with everything that was happening in LA. In my opinion, the biggest story is the administration used the National Guard on U.S. citizens, overriding the orders of a sitting governor. And that had not been done since the 60s. And guys, when it was done in the 60s, it was used because certain southern states refused to desegregate, right? They were fighting back against the civil rights movement and the fight for equality. So that's why Johnson called in the Army, the National Guard, and overrode sitting governors. In my opinion, guys, I love what Padilla did. We are asking, the Democratic voters are asking for fight. We are asking for our representatives to do our job. So I love what Padilla did here. But the meeting with force for what he did, completely out of bounds. And once again, that is not normal in a democracy. Now, moving on to story number 4, we have RFK Jr. removing all advisors from the Vaccine Advisory Committee. So RFK Jr. gutted the expert panel of vaccine advisors that has historically guided the federal government's vaccine recommendations, saying that the group is, quote, plagued with conflicts of interest. That's so funny because I've never seen an administration plagued with more conflicts of interest than the Trump administration in my entire life. But I digress. So there were 17 members of this advisory committee who are all replaced, including people who advised on immunization practices. So these people will be retired and replaced with new members. This is, of course, an unprecedented move. At some point, I wish I do not have to come here every day and say something has been unprecedented. But that is where we're at. As members in this committee, guys, they typically serve 4-year cycles, and at that point, things can be reevaluated. But RFK Jr. said that Trump would not be able to appoint new members until 2028. And my response to that is, yeah, that's how things generally work. You can't have someone just come in and get everything they want. We are not in a monarchy or a dictatorship. There are different balances that should be abided by. That is the reason we fought Britain, right? Was the idea of a system of balances. So one person or one administration can't just come in and flatly do everything they want to do, right? It's the whole systems of checks and balances. But they want to just come in, break every single system we have, and just honestly do whatever they want. Now, an advisor who was terminated stated that they did not know that they were terminated until Kennedy's op-ed was posted. And this advisor was quoted as saying, "I've never seen anything this damaging to public health happen in my lifetime. This will fundamentally destabilize vaccination in America." Now, off this, we also have a fear of filling these positions with exclusively vaccine skeptics, excuse me. And I think one of the best quotes I have seen with this new plight and influx, I guess, of vaccine hesitancy is the idea that we have defeated these diseases so well, right? So vaccines have done such a good job. We have forgotten what it's like to deal with diseases like polio or smallpox or measles. So it's like we've gone so far, the vaccines have done such a good job, we have forgotten the history of what these diseases can do absent of vaccines. My recommendation, as I have had for anything related to healthcare under this administration, is find your best, most reliable primary care doctor, physicians you can, and follow their advice. I would largely stay away from anything coming out of the White House. I would not trust it, unfortunately. And I'm actually, guys, working to get healthcare providers on the show to provide some deeper context as well. Now, moving on to the fifth and final story. This is a good story. I wanted to save this positive one for the end, but we had record high numbers for the No Kings protest, actually outdoing the Women's March as Trump's B-Day celebration flopped tremendously. So in terms of the numbers for the No Kings protest, guys, the estimates are more just over 5 million marching across America and nearly 2,000 planned protests in every state, basically. It is an incredible showing of solidarity, ladies and gentlemen, to get this many people all across the country in the largest numbers in history to unite against the same cause. And they were overwhelmingly peaceful. I know Fox News, is out there lusting for as much shock and awe content and violence as they can possibly find. But overall, guys, most of 99% plus of the protests were 100% peaceful. And I just want to remember, guys, for any of you still watching Fox News, they argued in open court that no reasonable person would take them seriously as a news product. So Fox News said that. That was their argument in court, and then had to pay nearly $800 million settlement for lying to the public. So that needs to constantly be in the background of your mind if you are consuming the garbage that is on Fox News. Now, what I'm actually going to do after this also is I'm going to record a video that's going to launch probably tomorrow, guys. But I'm going to be ranking 10 of the best anti-Trump signs that I saw from the protest. So that is something you guys can look forward to. But while Trump got his ego-stroking birthday party event that cost me and you, the taxpayers, anywhere from $25 to $45 million, we were out protesting the streets in record numbers. Now, to break that down, guys, that 25 to 45 million, not to mention a weird, sponsored by Coinbase in the middle of it, and just awkward funding. It wasn't as well put together of an event as I think Trump would have wanted, let's just say. But conservatively, based on the amount of people who showed up, this event cost me and you around $1,000 per person who attended. But it could have potentially cost each of us nearly $2,000 per person. It just depends on the final numbers that do come out. What I read and what math I saw, rough math calculations, is they expected 200,000 people, but the actual number was somewhere between 25 to 50,000. 50,000 is what I saw on the high end based on pictures and objective calculations not coming out of the White House propaganda machine. Now, I think this social media clip, when I saw it, it made me laugh. Some of you may have already seen it, but I think it sums up perfectly how the day went for Donald Trump. So guys, needless to say, this was not a good day whatsoever for Trump. And this is actually the exact kind of stuff that bothers him to the core. There are rumors that he's really upset with how this went and the low turnout. But I do want to say positively that those military members who valiantly have served our country and felt valued from this display, you guys do deserve it. I do not think we do nearly enough for our veterans, but I would argue a better route to go would be to financially invest in them through like veteran affairs and different programs that benefit our soldiers once they return home, rather than some, performance. It's kind of like, guys, when you're at a workplace and instead of paying you more, they just throw a pizza party, right? It gives those kind of vibes. But once again, those of you who served and felt valued from this, I do appreciate your service. I wish we would invest in you more. On that note, let's jump in today's episode where I will be unpacking the student loan crisis. And we are going to start, guys, with some facts and figures. So currently, the student loan crisis exceeds $1.7 trillion with nearly 43 million people. So that's about 1 in 6 adults having some form of federal student loan debt. And this, guys, is the first time in U.S. history we have had this level of student loan debt. And keep in mind, this figure doesn't even include the amount that individuals may have with private companies. Because remember, guys, not everyone could necessarily get all of their loans done federally. So there are also private loans that aren't even factored in to that $1.7 trillion. Now, in general, guys, more student loans continue to be dispersed, so handed out, than are being repaid in general. That has been the overall trend that we have seen year after year after year. So the debt obviously then continues to grow, and we don't really move any closer to a solution. And guys, this number, $1.7 trillion, that is such a difficult number to even comprehend. But it's undeniable that that is a problem. That is a huge albatross. We're talking about a $1.7 trillion debt that we are facing as a country. Now, to attend a public university, to break it more down with the numbers, the average annual tuition is around $34,000 a year for a bachelor's program, and then $28,000 a year for a master's program. Now, American college students borrow around $4,600 per full-time equivalent student yearly. So obviously, guys, some students are going to be above that money depending on their economic background, maybe their access to scholarships, and some people will be below that for maybe similar reasons. Now, the average American student graduates with around $29,000 in debt, with about 2/3 having some kind of debt in general, whether it's around that average, above that average, or below. But in general, guys, the cost of college education is far outpacing wage growth. We see that in almost every sector where wages have not kept up with the cost of things, and that is true with college education. So the cost of college has increased about 8 times as much as the growth of wages have. So you can just imagine how much more difficult it is nowadays for families who are getting paid less relative to how much things cost to afford college for one kid, much less like a family of 3 or 4. So this has other repercussions because it leads to many young people delaying important life milestones. So a survey of individuals with student loan debt found that 21% of them delay marriage due to their student loans, 26% put off having kids due to student loans, and 36% put off buying a house due to student loans. But we also live in a society, guys, as technology is advancing and AI is on the precipice, we're becoming more automated, that getting a college degree is becoming increasingly important, right? Particularly a lot of what, is used, I don't like this term, but these idea of lower skilled, quote unquote, jobs, a lot of those are going to be eliminated from AI technology. So furthering education is actually becoming more relevant in today's society. Also, guys, people with college degrees earn anywhere, kind of depends where you look at, but they earn anywhere from 60 to 80% more than those without a college degree. So it creates this difficult situation as a young person in America where you have this double-edged sword, right? Do I go to college and take the risk of having that chance of upward mobility? I'm likely to make more money, but I'm going to have crippling debt. Or do I go and not go to college, not start off life with that debt, but then I'm taking a greater risk that my wage and my income or my salary is going to lag behind and not be able to keep up with expenses. So that is the reality that we leave in the hands of a lot of young people and families to face and to deal with. Now, for the United States, I wanted to break down the cost of education because those numbers and the facts and figures, some of you probably know that if you've gone to college yourself, or you're saving up for a child to go to college, or you've helped pay for one of your kids to go to college, but some of you may not know how much it costs. So let's break down looking at a public and a private university. So we're going to stick in the state of Maryland just because that is where I am born and raised. And we're going to look at University of Maryland, which is my alma mater, a public university, a state university, versus Washington College, which is a private university in Chestertown, Maryland. On the screen now, you guys are going to see the overall cost from these two different colleges. And in general, guys, what you're going to notice and what is generally a true trend and what makes sense is the public universities in general are going to be cheaper because public universities do have, the assistance more so of the government and funding through the government than private institutions have, particularly for in-state students. So you can see the average University of Maryland student pays about $16,210 per year after all, possible student aid is handed out versus about $31,650 at Washington College. But you can also see, although Washington College does have the higher price, more aid tends to be available for a greater percentage of the student body, but that is likely a direct result of the higher cost, meaning more people would need financial aid in order to attend. Now, we're going to dive a little bit deeper as well by looking at the tuition breakdown and other costs. And what we can see once again is tuition significantly higher at the private institution. That is normal. But I want you guys also to look at the huge difference from University of Maryland between in and out of state tuition. And I do not mind this difference at all, other than in general, the prices being too high, right? I have a big problem with just all of this is too expensive. But the idea of trying to, keep homegrown home state talent local, I think is a great strategy, particularly guys. Remember, say for me, I've been growing up in Maryland basically all my life. My family has, we have been taxed in the state of Maryland. So it's a little way to kind of, gift or give back to young people and families who have lived in the state by greatly lowering the public tuition if you choose to stay in the state, you're a resident of. So I actually do like that policy. Now, as you look at these numbers, I wanted to also note that scholarships, even scholarships, guys, that are deemed full ride, do not cover or rarely cover every single expense of a college-age student. So for instance, maybe a student gets a scholarship where tuition is covered, but books and or their housing is not. Maybe, the student may need groceries in addition to what they are able to get with their on-campus resources and dining plan. Also, their dining plan may not be adequate. If they're living on campus, eating 3 meals a day, including the weekend, they may need to just supplement the food they're eating due to an inadequate dining plan. Visiting home, guys, cost money, or having people visit individuals at college cost money. And then, guys, we can't dismiss the fact being a kid in college too is a thing that costs money. And I don't think that's something we should be stripping away from young people, that young college experience, just because they are penny pinching and worried about, $120,000 of student debt they're going to have to deal with after they graduate. Now, when I look at the prices of things in the United States, I always think it is relevant to take a step back and look around the world. Because if we are in alignment with the rest of the world, then it's not necessarily a US problem, right? It's maybe a world problem, or it's time to analyze something differently. But when looking at how much we pay for college in the US, of course, the United States is generally out of whack with the rest of the world. So the cost of students for a bachelor degree in the US is more than anywhere else in the world. Public universities charge undergraduates around $10,000 per year. That was a similar number to what we saw at the University of Maryland, for instance. But this is nearly double countries like Japan and Canada and what their students need to pay for public universities. Now, in terms of further education, Lithuania, well, it's kind of weird to me, but Lithuania was the only country that outpaces the US in terms of cost of master's program, but it was much closer, about $13,000 to $12,500. So US is by far the most expensive when it comes to public universities, and then is in the top 2 when it comes to master's programs. So we are paying more than other countries. Now, when looking at the numbers, the US tends to outpace other developed nations in the price of education, like I said. But why is this? So I did a little research. I delved a little bit deeper. And the first stop is always bureaucracy in our government. So I'm going to break this down more in kind of the history lesson of how we got here with our student loan crisis. But our government simply does not invest in education the way other countries do. So, and that starts honestly, guys, before a kid even thinks about college. We as a country simply do not value and do not invest tax dollars into public education in the way other countries who have far more successful educational programs are doing. Particularly at the K through 12 level, as opposed to maybe the university or college level. Now, in the US, there's also a huge focus on college sports that is not necessarily rivaled the same in other countries. So certain sports like Alabama football, right? North Carolina basketball, things like that. Those are very profitable for universities. But most sports guys operate at a deficit, particularly if you're at smaller colleges or smaller universities. And that's money that the university has to find from somewhere. So that can often lead to the increase in tuition. There are also, guys, to be quite frank, a lot more fancy amenities at U.S. institutions and colleges than some places around the world, for instance. I know when I went to college, I did not have air condition, and then it now has become more commonplace at Maryland to have air condition. And I would assume every dormitory or almost every dormitory. But that costs money. That money needs to come from somewhere, right? Some universities, guys, have water parks, right? Water slides, fancy dining rooms, and fancy workout facilities that would rival, like, you know, D1 athlete level facilities, new technology, fancy dorm features. Even some countries, guys, which I agree with, right, are moving to clean energy, but a lot of times that costs more money as well. So a lot of the different amenities that I mentioned just drive up prices. We also have increased administrative roles and costs at university due to increased demand. So we have a basic, supply demand curve here where the demand for college education is very high. So there needs to be more staff in general to deal with the increased number of students. And that also deals with if more students are applying to college, that means more student loans also being handed out. Now, I'm going to jump in more to a brief history lesson of how we got here. So sit back and we're going to rewind back to the early 20th century. So we're going to look at 1919. So in 1919, we had just under 600,000 enrolled in college. But guys, this was 1919. So they were basically all wealthy white men who were making up those nearly 600,000 college students. Now enter 1944. So we're going to fast forward a little bit here. We have the GI Bill, which allowed vets to also go to college for free. So this expanded access from just wealthy white men being able to access college level education. Now, 1958 arrives, we have the Cold War, and we have the passing of the National Defense Education Act, which started the scholarships and loan processes for college. So you can really mark that time in the late 50s as the beginning of student loan debt in the US. What a foundational, wonderful moment for us. Now, fast forward a little bit, just less than a decade later, 1965, we have LBJ and his war on poverty. And in that fight, he passed the Higher Education Act, which introduced grants based on incomes and opened up opportunities for groups normally excluded from attending higher education. And the overall goal, guys, of the Higher Education Act was to ensure that all Americans had equal access and opportunity to pursue higher education and to maintain the quality and accountability of colleges and universities. So throughout the 70s, for instance, guys, Pell Grants were expanded. So that helped gain access through financial assistance for low-income students, for instance. But then we have the 80s, guys, and it seems like the more research I do, whether it's wealth inequality, the war on drugs, the overcriminalization of nonviolent offenders, a lot of it seems to start with Reagan era, and if not Reagan, some Republican leader. So in 1981, we welcome in the Reagan era, which you can look at as the tax cut era. So because of that, states now no longer had the ability to subsidize education, including higher education, in the same way they had pre-Reagan. So to address the financial shortfalls, because remember, they're not getting the same tax money, colleges started raising tuition, so passing the price on to young college students. They started cutting programs, and then you get things also like larger class sizes, right? So in the 80s, guys, the price of private colleges on average went from $17,410 all the way up to $26,050. Now, the price of public colleges did not go up as much, but it still went up in 80s dollars from $7,900 to $9,800. So in 2025 dollars, guys, most countries right now are paying less for public colleges than we did all the way back starting in the 80s. Think about that. Now, in the 2000s, we had the Bush era recession. This led to even deeper cuts to education and higher education. And then we're looking at the decade now, guys, from 2008 to 2018. The costs for colleges have increased by 25%, but wages have basically been stagnant and have not kept up with the increased price of anything, but that includes the price of college. So at this point, state and federal funding for education has not returned to pre-2008 levels. So overall, guys, there is also a basic, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a supply and demand issue. So there's an increased demand for college education and in the states, which in turn has increased the financial aid and operational costs to accommodate the number of students that want college degrees. And this has been paired with the reduced funding through taxes, through subsidies, which has led to the increased prices of tuition at public universities. So it's kind of pushing the onus onto the individual more so. And this kind of amalgamation, let's say, has led to the mess that we have on our hands now. And I want to fast forward, guys, to present day in 2025, where we now have many individuals who went delinquent on their student loan payments overnight due to the Trump administration's goal of resuming student loan payments. And this obviously tanked many people's credit scores almost immediately. So here's Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt on the issue of student loan repayments and garnishing people's wages.
Debt cannot be wiped away. It just ends up getting transferred to others. So why should Americans who didn't go to college or went to college and responsibly paid back their loans pay for the student loans of other Americans? The Trump administration will never force taxpayers to pay student loan debts that don't belong to them. Student loan borrowers need clarity, and we're finally giving it to them. Borrowers will now be clearly expected to repay their loans, and those who default on their loan obligations will face involuntary collections.
One of the responses I would have to this press secretary is, and in general, this administration, if a problem is this widespread of a societal issue, it is clearly not individuals being irresponsible. So the idea of fixing this problem that is clearly a systemic problem, guys, we're talking about $1.7 trillion in debt. That's a systemic failure. That's not an individual failure. So the idea of focusing on crushing people, garnishing their wages, tanking their credit score for a systemic societal issue is not only morally incorrect, but it's economically short-sighted to say the least, because now money is not flowing into the economy. That money is instead just going to the federal government. So once again, the system is what is failing, not the individual. So instead of just trying to push more people towards bankruptcy and once again crushing the individual citizen, let's actually explore some policy proposals that I believe will help the average American and help the country at large in addressing the student loan crisis. So first and foremost, this problem, in my opinion, is so out of control that I do believe forgiveness needs to be the first step. Guys, once again, we're talking about $1.7 trillion, okay? And this problem is off the rails. Now, Biden's forgiveness plan of $10,000, it was, means tested. There was more to it, but just in general, for simplicity, let's call it a $10,000 forgiveness, was struck down by the Supreme Court. And I honestly, guys, just practically, I do not see any form of forgiveness being approved under this massively conservative leaning Supreme Court we currently have. And I cannot express how frustrating it is to have a Supreme Court that is not at all representative of the American people. And the Supreme Court is just made up and is based on how many people basically just die or retire when a president is in office. That is an insane system. At a minimum, we need term limits on our Supreme Court justices. With that said, I believe that the $10,000 at this point is actually inadequate. I would double it. I would have done $20,000 in universal forgiveness for everybody with federal student loans. I like, guys, universal programs because it pushes back on some people who are like, well, I don't benefit from this. I like a universal approach for this. And the reason, guys, I'm upping it to $20,000 is that fits in much closer with the average debt most people have when leaving college. Now, I think it is great for any level of forgiveness. And Biden actually did get loans forgiven during his 4 years for a lot of people. Unfortunately, it didn't touch me, but he did hit a lot of forgiveness and did help a lot of people. But for a lot of people, $10,000 is not sufficient or not nearly sufficient enough. So that is where I land on that $20,000 number. Now, I also understand, guys, forgiveness alone is not going to fix the system. If we don't do anything else and just do the forgiveness, the loans are just going to pile up and we're going to be in an even worse position down the road than we're in right now. But it is a necessary start, in my opinion, to address a generation of people who did exactly what they were told to do, right? Went to school, got good grades, then went to college. They were told by adults, by people, young people who were teenagers, 16, 17, 18, maybe young 20s, were constantly told by adults that this is the way to go. And ultimately, we were then saddled with this albatross of debt for doing what we were basically told to do. And like I said before, guys, it is better to have more money flowing into the economy and into the business rather than having people penny pinch because they're worried about paying off student loan debt, or they now have a $600 student loan payment that they did not have previously. But let's talk about some solutions beyond forgiveness. So maybe you're staunch anti-forgiveness. We need to address this regardless, beyond just making the individual suffer. So let's look at some other possible solutions. I think there should be an increase in programs that provide free state or public university tuition for people reporting certain income thresholds as a household. So I would throw in that I think community college should be universally free and provided for the government. But certain universities like Harvard, for instance, they are starting in this upcoming 2025-26 school year, free tuition for families making under $100K a year. Brown also has a similar program for families earning $125,000 or less. Carnegie Mellon, Columbia University, and a host of other schools have similar programs. So I would like to see the movement towards these programs increase, more push for that. But I would also go further and like to see a movement towards free tuition at public universities for in-state students universally. This would require an investment, obviously, in tax dollars into education, more similar to pre-Reagan cut eras. But I think, guys, we are talking about education, which I'll get to in a second as to why, I think investing in this through taxing the rich more potentially would be really beneficial. Now, these are some additional ideas that I think could address the student loan crisis. Increase of Pell Grant recipients. We discussed how the 70s, that increase was really helpful to providing access. I would also increase not just the number, but the amount that is covered through the Pell Grant, so the actual dollar amount. I think there also needs to be more pathways for students to earn college credits prior to actually enrolling at college. So you can do this through partnering with local community colleges or universities to enroll in some college classes, potentially get adjunct professors to come to local high schools. There are also things, guys, like advanced placement programs where you can get college credit, or IB programs. The issue, though, guys, is those pathways aren't equally available for all families and all students. I would also look at increased forgiveness opportunities and making sure that the pathway towards forgiveness is clearer for students and families. So, for instance, one thing that could be done is you could limit 5% of your discretionary income towards student loan payment. And maybe if you're able to make that 5% payment over the course of a decade, regardless of your field, the rest is forgiven, right? You could cap tuition prices based on a percent of family income. You can also increase accreditation standards for universities and colleges to ensure that students are getting their money's worth, right? That when they actually graduate and leave college, they are career ready and employable, right? We also can look at eliminating predatory practices. So things like removing hidden fees, lowering the ridiculous interest rates that some of these loans have. Because remember, guys, these are usually young people and families who are jumping into these loans, and maybe they're not aware of what they're signing, and they're kind of just trusting the system of like, my kid needs an education. I don't think the country will screw me over to this degree for my child just trying to get a better education. Particularly, guys, imagine if a young person is trying to enroll in college and their parents never went to college, trying to navigate that system. I would also, guys, as a whole, this is something I will push almost to solve every problem. We need to raise taxes on the rich. It is long overdue, and we need to focus on taxing wealth versus income, because we know the rich will take home and report very low income, so it isn't their wealth isn't taxed. But until we actually raise taxes on the rich and redistribute resources more adequately, we are going to continue to run into problems like we have with our education system. And this leads me to my final point, guys, really with the student loan crisis and education at large. This is all about access. For me, the student loan crisis and the way we talk about and address education in general in this country is an access issue. And right now we are moving further and further into segregated education system based on socioeconomic backgrounds. I mean, I would argue, I'm sure a lot of you out there would agree with me, that we are already there in many situations, but really what we are doing through the price of college, through our defunding of public institutions, whether it's higher education or whether it's K through 12, is we are just ramping up the speed and the degree to which this segregation is happening based on socioeconomic markers. We are basically marching more so into a system where quality education, guys, is only going to be available for the rich and the privileged exclusively. And that is not a country I want to live in. I hope that's not a country you want to live in. Now, a lot of people will argue then, if you can't afford it, then just don't go to college. But first of all, as we discussed earlier, college is becoming increasingly important, particularly as AI, guys, is going to eliminate many what they are referred to as low-skilled jobs. We're going to need high-skilled labor to compete globally. I also, guys, and I hope you're on the same line, I don't want my surgeons, dentists, engineers, teachers, chemists, biologists, rocket scientists, astronauts, whatever, we hold value to in terms of going through some kind of schooling. I don't want those people to be less educated and have less standards and just bypass a college or university model. In fact, I want the highest of standards for colleges and universities in the United States. But I also want to note, guys, this does not mean that trades are not also important. I think a lot of times, often intentionally, the media puts like people who go to college against people who didn't go to college, and it's this fight between these two factions when, guys, that's not how it should be. Both are incredibly valuable. Just like I would think we wouldn't want to live in a world where we don't have the most talented doctors, regardless if they're coming from high rich backgrounds or poor backgrounds or middle class backgrounds, right? You want the most talented doctors. If you need open heart surgery, I probably would assume you want the best person for that job, whether they, were rich and were able to pay for college, or whether they were poor and the government needed to help a little bit through taxes to get them through schooling, right? In the same way, guys, I value trades. Trades are also incredibly important. You need both. I don't want to, guys, my apartment would be in shambles in a month if I didn't have, people who had skilled trades helping around the apartment in the complex that we live at. We obviously, guys, need people like electricians. We need plumbers. We need HVAC technicians, so on and so forth. The list continues. But we also need people with college degrees to fill positions as well. We need a balance of both to have a functioning society. So if you're kind of part of that camp where it's just you just shouldn't have gone to college then, think about what that means. What you're saying, without, I think, realizing it, is you should only go to college if you're rich. And if you can't figure out it financially, you should go into something else, which, for me, guys, we should not be limiting what our young people are able to achieve or what they are able to learn or what education level, they're striving for based on the amount of money their family has. Guys, we're punishing young people based on socioeconomic standings of their parents, which makes it even harder to break to get generational wealth and break out of a system of poverty when educational attainment and that upward mobility isn't even an option. And guys, just in general too, I want you to imagine how much talent we lose as a country in certain positions and people not reaching their potential due to financial constraints. But I don't want you guys to get it twisted. It's not like magic that this happened. The system is actively set up and working as our leaders intended it to. And probably not too much of a surprise to you. It hurts communities, the most vulnerable communities and communities of color the most.
We also see how the student loan industry targets particularly communities of color and borrowers of color. We've seen cases about how for-profit schools engage in, redlining practices, particularly offering worthless degrees into the hardest hit communities. We see how student loan servicers will fail to get borrowers of color into critical consumer protections, leaving them more prone to delinquency and default. And this happens over and over again, where it's not only more debt, it's how the student loan industry drives needless interest, fees, predatory products that just makes the student debt crisis even worse.
Something that is always kind of important to remember, and this is something that I always take with me when I'm discussing education, and one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it, is dating back to the founding of this country and slavery and enslaving people. The main thing that slave owners did not want enslaved people to do is to become literate, right? That was the number one thing. Do not let them read. Do not let them become literate. Why? That is because the slave owners knew and acknowledged that education leads to liberation. Okay. And by stripping access of education, people are less likely to be able to fight back. And in some ways, guys, that's what we are unfortunately heading towards right now. Education for the elites only, eliminating access for people without the financial means to access it otherwise. And once again, guys, it's not magic. Well-educated people are harder to control. They're more of a nuisance for billionaires because they're more likely to fight back. So this is all part of, guys, a structured plan. It's not random how we got here. I also, guys, want a society of actual choice, or what we like to call in the US freedom, right? Where regardless of your background, whether you're from a poor background and want to be an engineer, or you're from a rich background and want to be a plumber, both people have the same equal access to that. And we should strive to be a country that helps people pursue their goals and their strengths, because that betters, guys, the country as a whole. Now, I want to finish ultimately here by addressing a popular argument that comes up a lot, particularly came up with Biden's loan forgiveness plan, which is, I paid my loan back, you should also. Guys, going through your own pain should not be a reason that other people should also go through that pain. That argument does not make any sense to me whatsoever, right? Like, to me, that's the same thing as, like, if someone's dealing with a disease that's difficult, oh, they had to go through that pain, so therefore everyone should have to go through that pain. That doesn't make sense, guys. In a developed society, you innovate, you make improvements so that it's better for the next generation. You shouldn't, in my opinion, sit on your high horse and look down on people who are trying to make improvements and make society better, particularly when you're acknowledging how painful it may have been to pay back those loans. Why wouldn't you want it better for society? And also, guys, I hate that often paying back student loans is talked about in a blasé nature, as if you're paying back a fancy like Lexus or a vacation to the Maldives. Guys, we're talking about education. We're talking about something that betters society, to have better educated populace. So the idea to beat people down for, trying to pursue education and better their life and better society at large is just asinine to me. And I will put my exact stake in the ground here, guys, just so you know a little bit about me right now. I am very near paying off all of my student loans, actually. I had some assistance from my parents, but since really getting out of college, it's been on me to pay it off. And I promise you, if the day they pass forgiveness is the day after I have personally paid all my loans, I am not going to sit there like a curmudgeon. Now, I'll be like, dang, that kind of sucks a little bit. But you know what I'm going to be thinking? I'm going to be happy for all the young people who can now consider buying a house, right? Or getting married or starting a family because they don't have to worry about the $85,000 of medical debt, a medical loan, doctor from going in and pursuing a doctorate that they have, right? That's where I would stand on the situation. Now, last little kind of twist of the knife here, this payback loan line is often perpetrated by the same actors who get forgiveness. So guys, our elected representatives basically think, yes, forgiveness for me, obviously. I'm an elected representative. I'm in Congress. I have, risen to this level of society where, I can obviously get forgiveness. But you guys, you average Americans, you don't deserve $10,000 or $20,000 in forgiveness, but I will happily go ahead and take my $180,000 of PPP loan forgiveness, or my $1.43 million, or my $2.8 million. So guys, please don't fall for that nonsense that we as average Americans don't deserve forgiveness for something like pursuing an education that actually betters society, when you have the same representatives taking money themselves and pocketing it for nothing related to improving the country. And on that wonderful note of Republican hypocrisy, Republican hypocrisy, guys, is as American as apple pie. But that is going to wrap up overall this episode on unpacking the student loan crisis. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you are listening, I know there's a high chance you have student loan debt yourself. What are some proposals you would like to see enacted by our representatives that could help address this crisis? Were there things I mentioned? Are there things I didn't mention? Are there things that I mentioned that you would tweak a little bit or that you find to be impossible? Just let me know what you think in the comments. But now our shout out of the week is actually going to go to someone we all know probably, but it's going to go to Taylor Swift, as she recently surprised patients at a children's hospital in Florida. Full disclosure here, guys, I am a fan of Taylor Swift. I have gone to nearly all of her tours, but I am not I don't think I'm as dedicated as many of the Swifties out there, let's just say, but I am a fan. I like her music. I go to the tours. But overall, this story is not about Taylor Swift fully, honestly. I think it's more about being a celebrity and the impact you're able to have. And the fact that regardless of if you want to be or not, when you enter the public eye to this degree, whether you're, an actor, a singer, an artist, professional athlete, whatever it may be, you are a role model, whether you like it or not, and you have the ability to impact and positively change so many lives. And I think this serves as another example of how doing something as relatively simple as visiting young people in a hospital can have such a lifelong imprint. And John Cena, for instance, guys, in the WWE, most of you probably know him. He's a wrestler. But he is famous for this. He has granted more Make-A-Wishes than any other person in history. So kind of a side shout out to John Cena as well for this. But once again, I just wanted to pick this story as a reminder of, despite of how dire things can feel, within the borders of the United States, but also even worldwide right now with what we're seeing in the Middle East. Just a reminder that little acts of kindness, even in times like this, can have a huge difference. And it's important that we need to fight together and come together to solve the issues that actually matter, like fighting childhood cancer and disease. Those are the things worth fighting for, right? All right, finishing with today's vibes, guys. Do not judge me with this one. Yes, it is because of my little one, but I promise you, even if you don't have a kid, this song is a vibe. So throw on the Arthur theme song. It's called Believe in Yourself. It's actually performed by Ziggy Marley. So turn that on. I promise your head will be bopping. And the actual message in the song is fantastic. Thank you for watching and being part of a growing progressive community. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you have the time, check out some of my other episodes you can see around me. Thank you.